So to the left, as a way of introduction, that's me, Linda Mayo. My experience with business continuity came from hands-on emergencies and disasters, starting when I was a direct support professional at an Easter Seals, New Jersey program. At that time, I dealt with floods, physical plant emergencies, and snowstorms, what we now consider to be a normal emergency. Throughout the years, however, I moved to senior and executive level positions where I graduated, quote unquote, from one location challenge to multi-site challenges. That includes consumers, staff, financial, and physical plant crises. I dealt with the aftermath of 9/11 while working for New York City HIV/AIDS agencies, which was the epicenter of the HIV pandemic. I was working at a community-based research organization at San Francisco State during a fallout after the 2008 financial crash and physical plant emergencies while working at an environmental lab on the San Francisco Bay, not to mention my crash course in earthquake and fire preparedness. My proudest moment was working with the phenomenal team at Easter Seals, New Jersey during Superstorm Sandy, where I served as the point person for business continuity. Now, 8 years later, here we all are facing COVID-19. Although this presentation addresses COVID-19, we designed it to be as generic as possible to apply to myriad emergency scenarios. Please note that the information we are sharing today is not to be used as a blueprint for your organization, but we ask that you not utilize or distribute this material without permission from the presenting organizations. Thanks for that. On the right, I'm extremely excited to introduce Leslie Stavali. She's the president and CEO of CCC Housing. CCC Housing is a nonprofit community housing development organization that expands affordable housing opportunities, provides supportive services to individuals, families, and veterans impacted by a disability. Individuals and families that experience homelessness or long-term hospitalization. And Leslie will provide more details during her presentation. To our agenda, which you can look at it on your screens. And being on this webinar, I just want to give kudos out. Being on this webinar means that you have survived and are planning to situate yourself and your organization for higher quality of services for your consumers, staff, and volunteers. And for you to take the time today to take stock of the amazing strides you have made to date to improve your current plan and also plan for the future. As we developed this presentation, our intent was to provide macro and micro ideas and information that will assist you today and into the future. And this will become more evident as we move through the slides. We encourage you to stay, and this is really important, folks, we really encourage you to stay as focused as possible throughout our time together. Reduce as much distraction as you possibly can given your role and responsibilities. We'd ask, and it's important for you to take this time that you've set aside to take pride in the areas you are currently doing well, those you want to improve, and on those you want to develop in the future. So good luck listening to the things that really will be helpful to you, and I just encourage you all to take some notes. Special needs considerations. Now, those of us that provide services for people with special needs have an extraordinary responsibility to properly plan and implement business continuity actions. As presented in this slide, which touches on some of the issues and challenges we face, there are limitless considerations to address. Everybody on the phone knows what I'm talking about. As we all know, there are an amazing number of sites and organizations that address disaster planning, emergencies, and now COVID-19 for individuals with special needs. There's American Red Cross, which I took some excerpts from Red Cross and put it on the slide, CDC, FEMA, state agencies, philanthropic, and university organizations. And a quick note, a little commercial break here for Bog Center. They recently put out a just-in-time webinar series. So many of you may know this, and for those of you who don't, Bog Center operates out of Rutgers. So all I have to do is do a search for the Bog Center out of Rutgers. And they just put out a just-in-time webinar series, as well as they have posted myriad resources that are available on their site. So our responsibility is to prepare, remain prepared, and train train our staff, ourselves and our staff. The key is not to allow day-to-day concerns to get in the way of developing and improving your plan on a regular basis. You really need those sit-down meetings and tabletop exercises. I am not ashamed to give you this example. At the time I was, but the month before Superstorm Sandy, I had revised the business continuity plan with numbers and updated locations, etc. And when we got the notice about the storm that was coming, I had a panic moment where I said, oh my God, we didn't update it, but we had, but it was only a month before. You do not want to have that experience like I did months before. And in the end of the day, it served me well, and I slept with that binder, without exaggeration, under my pillow for 10 days, 10 to 14 days actually, that lasted for the immediate crisis of Superstorm Sandy. Leslie will be providing technical specifics on planning and execution, but I'd like to preface by highlighting a few important points to develop or to further refine in your business continuity plan. First off, most of us are expert at responding to situations. Oftentimes our first instincts are to respond. However, our instincts are not to plan necessarily. So responding too quickly in an emergency or a crisis can be the equivalent of reacting rather than being proactive. Recommendations to be as effective as possible is to stop what you are doing, pause, and think. These are really important, albeit very hard actions to take in the middle of a crisis when you've got dozens or more people demanding your attention and many things to be concerned about. But after you know that safety and health is under control for the most part, you want to stop and assess the situation, no matter what it is, and really gather together as many variables as you can and then prioritize. All of us, I know, have been guilty of doing something quickly only to be punished when we have to stop, backtrack, and fix something that could have been done properly in the first time around. Had we taken the time in the first place, we would not be in that position, and that's very painful to be able to have to backtrack about, and so I really advise you to stop. My adage has been over the years, people who know me personally will tell you that if there's no blood or hospitalizations, that I should stop, pause, assess, and then act. Taking time can save valuable time, energy, and resources in the future. And lessons learned, you have to say no. Be judicious with your time and energy. That's not in our natures to say no, but saying no is really critical. And delegate whenever possible. Then you can have, for peace of mind, you can have the folks that you delegate to report back so you know the job is complete. And again, Leslie will go over some of the specific mechanisms and tools that you can use to do that. First, I'd like to reinforce the great importance to thank your team members and thank them as profusely, as well as demonstrating your gratitude with tangible ways, such as sending pizza, sandwiches, bringing cookies, investing in $5 gift cards to Dunkin' Donuts and Wawa when you see folks, or the supervisors see them and the managers see them, to give them a card here and there. It goes a long way. You'll realize a terrific return on investment for this small but valuable gestures. And one note, harking back to Superstorm Sandy at Easter Seals, New Jersey, the best thing our CEO did and our HR officer did was, when things were up and running for some of the restaurants, they went out and they were in charge of getting coffee and bringing hot food to all of our, many of our locations. I can't say all of them, it was all over the state. And that went such a long way, and that was a great job to keep them busy too, was to get them out at Dunkin' Donuts and Boston Market and the like. We're going to move to challenges, adaptations, and solutions. What I thought I would share, and to show that we are not alone, a recent survey, as recent as the beginning of this month, the Rutgers Psychiatric Rehabilitation and Counseling Professions, together with the New Jersey Association of Mental Health and Addiction Agencies, aka NJAMA, conducted open-ended survey to identify key challenges facing providers due to COVID. You're going to recognize each and every one of these challenges, but you may want to look at them a little carefully to understand if there's anything that might be, recognize the things that you're doing really well, and then look at the things that you want to improve or you need to develop in the future. So one of the first things, of course, for all of us in these situations is safety, health, and well-being. And I'll let you read the list of what the respondents, 66% of the respondents, there was 48 responses from 39 organizations, which is a fairly good sample given of mental health providers, especially during emergency situation. But you could see that these were the types of things that came to the fore and was rated as the highest concern or challenge. Number 2 is telehealth. Many of us that are providing services that are in a position to be able to provide telehealth services, that was 56% of the respondents were cited telehealth as a challenge. The third piece was face-to-face hands-on work. And the next one was staffing. You would have thought that staffing might have been a little higher up, but at the early stages of the pandemic and this crisis, it was only 19% of the respondents were concerned about absenteeism, etc. at this time. Then we've got funding at 18%. Other challenges cited were communications, billing, medications, consumer unemployment, drug testing, behavioral health, COVID-19 beds, very important, outreach services, organizational survival, post-COVID-19, housing, access to shelters, and there's of course a hyper focus on the pandemic. So again, I went over this in the category of you are not alone and wanting to point out, the things that I'm sure many of you have addressed, many of these areas on the list, and thinking about things that you can improve or you want to develop in the future. Notably, Leslie has been in contact with Dr. Gill, one of the PIs of the survey, and they're planning to continue to build on these findings. And you can see the full report at the bottom of the slide is, if you go to NJAMA, you can find it at the NJAMA organization and links Rutgers final COVID-19 survey. I think it should be an easy search on your browser. One of the things that I found amazingly helpful for me, and I wanted to be able to share it with you in this presentation, was a Tough Times call to action, a decision framework for nonprofit leaders and boards. It was a brief that was written courtesy of Sea Change, an organization that I had just learned about. Many of you might know about it. And I found the Sea Change through a connection I have on LinkedIn, and I wanted to point out that I understand that we are all being barraged with an amazing amount of emails, newsletters, articles, webinars, and it gets overwhelming. But what SRS has found and recommends, is you may know this already, is that your specific trade organizations often provide the most targeted information that's specific for you and your services and your programs. So again, going to your trade organizations and being able to sort through them, through this barrage of information. One idea or recommendation is when to review this information, because again, there's so much coming at us, which is great in a wonderful way that there's so many resources out there, but it can be so hard to get to all of it. But the recommendation from us is to review this information when you have no or few distractions. For example, like early in the morning before you start your day, or at the end of the day. And based on your experience, I recommend that you don't do this right before you go to sleep, or you'll be dreaming about generators, IT challenges, and cash flows. So that's just my little tidbit, because I know that happens to me. So what I want to do is briefly review their 8 areas. And again, there's 3 slides on this brief from Sea Change. For the complete brief, look at your bottom left corner of your slide, and you'll see www.seachange.cap.org, and you'll be able to get there. And they have a tremendous amount of resources that I was very impressed with. So when we look at refocus on the mission, all decisions should aim to advance the long-term mission for the organization, even at the short-term expense of your vendors, partners, grant makers, and staff. I know, tough talk. But I would also add, this is me speaking, is that this is the time for you to be as upfront and honest with your board about your challenges and be directive. If you haven't been comfortable with doing that in the past, I would suggest that now is the time. This is a crisis. You have to be bold. You should drive what they can offer you and your team, because you're the boots on the ground. You know what's going on. You should not be driven about what they or other stakeholders may think is a priority, but you know with your boots on the ground and your team know otherwise. Speak truth to the governance, no matter how hard or uncomfortable. This is the time to be bold. Understanding your type of organization. Are you a hibernator? Example here is a shuttered arts organization. A responder, such as a shelter of a food bank where demand is skyrocketing. Or a hybrid, a group that can continue to operate to some degree but does not deal directly with the pandemic's effects, though it might adapt to do so. Understand your organization. I would ask you to be realistic about your service offerings and programs. You may have or you will have to pause some of your services. I know how painful that is. I've been in that position more times than I care to think about, but that is something that you may have to do if you haven't done so already, and especially when we get through the major portion of this initial crisis. Conserving cash. Reduce your expenses, delay payments, accelerate efforts to obtain cash and other revenue, and explore new funding opportunities. Negotiate with your landlord or take advantage of local bans on evictions. Pay only the most essential vendors. Ask for the next tranche of multi-part grant for extra help from longtime donors and board members. Explore new COVID-related grant and loan opportunities, and explore new fundraising. I know it's tough, but these are critical decisions you have to make. No one wakes up and says, I can't wait to make these hard, difficult decisions, but here we are. You have to make these decisions in a timely, decisive way. I can't emphasize that enough. You have to think out of the box. You have to take the time, get some space, and do not hesitate to approach your funders to see if restricted funds can be used for emergency funds. Now, be sure if you do that, we know that funders restrict their funds for particular reasons that are very near and dear to them. But if you give them specifics to how you use their funds, they will be informed, and then hopefully they can make a quicker decision if they're going to release those restricted funds to you or not. And you don't spend a whole lot of time spinning wheels or waiting for them to answer. One of the things, an example I can give that was really heartening was years ago when I worked for National Easter Seals. We had a major funder for decades who had pulled out due to a corporate sponsor that got pulled out due to a merger. And so what did we do? We went out to some funders that we knew well and some that we didn't know so well, and we asked them if they could help us bridge this gap during this unexpected loss of a significant amount of income. And some said yes, and some said no. But remember, the worst that anybody can say to you is no. I'm going to go to this, oops, I apologize, there we go. We're going to go to the second slide in the brief. And one of my favorites here is number 4 is resist magical thinking, shorten the time horizons. When we're under duress, we can suffer from magical thinking. They often let too much time, or nonprofits often let too much time pass before acting. So we just reinforced that a moment ago. Given that most nonprofits have almost no margin for error, even in normal times, magical thinking or delayed decision-making can often be fatal. Executive directors and board chairs need to impress upon the broader set of trustees, even those that think, hey, I never signed up for this, that their time and money is more important than ever. I mean, that's an old adage of ours, but it couldn't be truer than it is now. This approach ensures that the organization remains nimble in a fast-moving crisis while keeping trustees appropriately involved. To avoid magical thinking, boards should pre-commit to difficult actions if certain events come to pass. Now, magical thinking, which is many of us do, I'll speak for myself, do with both our personal and professional lives, but magical thinking can be defined as the belief that one's own thoughts, wishes, or desires can influence external circumstances. And on that note, we'll move to number 5, because I'd love to talk more about magical thinking, but we'll move on to number 5, which is explore mergers and acquisitions, divestment, restructuring, or a dignified dissolution. Don't weather the crises only to ignore what will happen afterwards. Stay in regular discussions with your donors and be realistic about the significant cuts in philanthropy and government support that are likely to occur in the COVID-19 aftermath. And the third slide in this brief is understanding the nexus of mission, cash, and control. These really take this to heart. I know that you've had to practice this, but you're going to have to continue this for months, weeks, and certainly months to come. To be tough-minded, hard-nosed, and ruthless. These are not adjectives that most nonprofit leaders usually embrace, but many will need to, and fast. The time is now. These are my notes. The time is now. It goes against most of our personal and professional natures, but in order to survive this crisis, you have to embrace these tenets, and so you can thrive in the future. Get help. It's not something also that we're used to doing. We're used as leaders and managers and supervisors, we're used to being resourceful and getting the job done and doing what it takes. But it's really critical right now to get outside advice from people with relevant experience. Some boards might even consider an interim chief restructuring officer to support or temporarily replace an overwhelmed leader. That sounds really a very significant or major occurrence, but it may be necessary. You may get a lot of people that are, when you're getting their advice, or you're getting people who are concerned about the decisions that you or the leadership have been making. You've got to sort out the naysayers. You've got to understand who's not pulling their weight, and you have to call them on it. Again, not easy, but if you let the naysayers or people not pulling their weight during this time when you're seeking help and support to advance your mission, to advance the day-to-day operations, you have to call them on it. Otherwise, the overachievers that inevitably pick up the fallout will burn out quickly. And finally, plan for the future. Don't weather the crises only to ignore what will happen afterwards. Very important. Stay in regular discussions with your donors and be realistic about the significant cuts in philanthropy and government that are likely to come in the aftermath. And my final slide is going to support looking at, in these times of crisis or emergency, evaluation can play an important role in maximizing the effectiveness of your work. So we're going to talk about real-time evaluation, and it's specifically, I really want you to think about your funders. They want to know how you will ensure that you use your resources efficiently and effectively. Oftentimes we forget during an emergency to keep our funders informed, whether they be public or private. And we really want to be able to maintain a regular communication with your funders to keep them, to keep you, your organization, in the front of their minds, and positions you to receive valuable resources, whether that be in kind or financial. You won't be bothering them. If they don't answer, you don't answer them. You follow up. You call them and express that you know that they're busy, but you wanted to touch base with them. You can ask them, hey, do you know of other things that are coming up that are going to be useful for us? And during this incredibly exceptional crises, if you have or will apply for emergency funds, use these techniques to be able to document and understand the requirements of any resources that are given to you. I can't stress enough the importance of immediately, upon receipt of anything that you receive from public or private donors, lay out those reporting requirements right at the start. Don't wait. Lay it out now. Even if do it at night, do it on the weekend, get your team to help you, and then track and document it on an ongoing basis. Do not wait to the end or prior to the reporting period when it's due. We all know that the quality of the report, not to mention our lives, are much better when you track and document along the way versus waiting until the last minute. So again, I would just reference the number one, set SMART goals: specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. A lot of language there. Do a search on it. I reference SMART goals all the time in my work. And if you do that, you'll get some really good tips and direction to inform how you're going to lay out the financial or in-kind resources that you receive, and you're going to be able to track it. How you're going to collect the data, make a plan, establish a system for collecting this data with frequent review, and design a simplified direct reporting method so everyone sees weekly or daily reports. Again, Leslie's going to touch upon that in her slides. And ask report recipients to record program adjustments they make, sharing as they go. Whether you have a database or a project management tool or a simple Excel spreadsheet, make sure everybody has access. So as these milestones are met, and you have the responsibility to report on any funds received by your funder, you're going to have them and track them, and you do a really good job of documenting it and positioning yourselves really well for the next inevitable crises or emergency. So good luck with that. And now I'm pleased to turn the presentation over to Leslie Stavali. And here we go. Leslie?
Thank you, Linda. Good afternoon, everyone. Allow me to open up this portion of the webcast with an overview of CCC Housing's experience with the Enterprise Foundation, the outcomes achieved, and our business continuity plan. So in 2014, CCC was one of 12 organizations selected to participate in a learning collaborative for resilience post-Sandy. This involved nonprofits from New Jersey and New York, and it was over a period of 2+ years that we received expert technical assistance and assessments that resulted in a customized disaster preparedness plan. It also provided for support plans for resiliency and recovery. So as we all know, the situation that we're in right now, disaster can strike at any time. And it could be anything from an earthquake, a hurricane, or a pandemic. So what do we do when we plan for the impact of a catastrophic event? Well, the first thing you should consider is assembling a departmental continuity committee or an emergency response team. The potential members you put together may involve IT, security, physical plant, insurance agent, legal counsel, human resources, accounting. This team can help you with the planning of your business continuity plan. And that is just a start to addressing the phases of a catastrophic event. Next slide. So we have a participant poll. So while I go through the presentation, if you can enter yes or no in the Q&A section, if you are either impacted personally or professionally by Superstorm Sandy. Next slide. So let's discuss the planning and operational periods to an event. So there are 3 planning areas that you need to map out. The first is an emergency action plan, which are steps taken immediately before an interruption to your business functions. The second is your disaster recovery plan, and those are steps to restore some functions to some level of services. And the last is your business continuity plan, and that's completing the full circle to get your organization back to where it was before the interruption. So the operational periods that you see before you reflect these periods before and after a catastrophic event. So you have this pre-event preparedness that should begin at least 96 hours or more ahead of an emergency. It's before the disaster strikes. And it's recommended that your plan include action steps to complete at each interval before a disaster strikes. And that would incorporate your communication strategy. And we'll get into that a little bit further in the slides. It's recommended that you are looking at the event's response that will cover all the responsibilities assigned to all the roles when you're in a stay alert mode prior to the event, and then how to respond immediately after the post-event period of response. That post-event involves the activities to be completed after the disaster takes place. So now that the phases of the event are laid bare, how do you build your plans? Next slide. So let's start at how you build your plan and address emergency response and business continuity. So there are 4 areas I want to cover with you. Know your agency, the common operating snapshot, situational awareness, and operational planning. So the know your agency part of the building your plan is, what do you do? Where are your locations? Map out your services, map out your capacity, and map out where you deliver those services, whether it be your administrative office, your group home, or your scattered site or multifamily housing. And then secondly, look at your common operating snapshot. In your day-to-day, map out how you do what you do. What are your business functions and the capacity? Map out each of your departments and how you carry out your common operations day to day. And then look at assessing your vulnerabilities to any type of disaster. And that's the situational awareness. So what does a disaster look like to you when you're looking at your emergency response and your business continuity? What are the details that'll impact your services and your sites? So are your sites located at the shore? Are they near a riverbed? Are they by an airport? What are the access points? What are the challenges to reach your consumers, your staff, your locations? So you need to look at that situational awareness. And just for an example, when Superstorm Sandy struck, it impacted not only, for CCC housing, our residences, our offices, especially those multifamily sites that we operate by the shoreline. It knocked out all utilities, IT, it zapped communications. We had limited access to sites with down trees, but in particular, we had limited access with the National Guard down in Point Pleasant Beach. We had to provide ID to enter the site as it stood 1 block to the beach. And to respond the day after Sandy struck, we had to get in there and actually do an assessment of not just the damage, because we took on 7 feet of storm surge and water in the building, but this is a 120-year-old building. So we had to immediately respond and get in there with a structural engineer and start pulling out everything from the basement, the sheetrock, what have you. So you have to assess what that would look like in the context of the situational awareness for a location such as that particular site. And then last, all these steps inform your operational planning. So the operational planning is how you design your emergency response and your business continuity. Next slide. So what are the key components to your emergency response? Let's start with that. So an incident command structure is crucial to guiding your activities pre-event, event, and post-event. So you need to not only map out the business functions, the locations, but you need to build your incident command structure, as the structure serves as your roadmap to identifying the who, what, when, and where. You build your table of organization for that incident command structure, you assign roles and responsibilities, and then you create your communication strategy. So let's take a look at the next slide and you can see what I'm talking about. So here is a table of organization for an incident command structure. Incident command structure. Say that 3 times real fast. So the incident commander at the top of the table of organization may be your CEO. That is the individual that triggers the incident command structure to take place, and that you start beginning the activities pre-event. That individual directs all activities with respect to how it is mapped out on your incident command structure, and also informs your communication strategy, which that moves to the command level administrator, right? So this may be your COO, it could be your top level executive admin staff, and that individual handles all your correspondence administratively, sharing your updates with the emergency response team or your business continuity committee. And then to the left of the incident commander, you have your external communications liaison. So that individual is who's reporting out, handling all the communications externally with funders, stakeholders, perhaps Office of Emergency Management, Department of Health, Division of Mental Health, Division Developmental Disabilities. And then you move over to your logistics chief right in the middle of your table of organization. That logistics chief is the individual who ensures that your incident command structure, the positions, the roles, the responsibilities are carried out in accordance to how your communication strategy is structured and what your emergency response action items are. To the left of the logistics chief is your business continuity chief. That's your CFO or your controller, your top finance position, handling all fiscal and admin operations. And then to the right of your logistics chief is your housing chief. That may be your property manager or your director of physical plant that's managing all the sites. And then looking at your main line, your front line, under business continuity, you have your IT and your human resources team leaders. And under your housing chief, you have your resident engagement and your building protection team leaders. Those positions are the front line with respect to communications across all departments, and making sure that you're not only communicating with everyone when it comes to having all of your business functions covered, but notably your resident engagement is really crucial to making sure that your consumers, individuals, families served, have a communication chain, and that you have somebody that's on the front line for building protection so that you have safety and security in mind when it comes to all the sites that you own and operate or rent. So once your table of organization is in place, with the roles and responsibilities laid out within the operational periods of a catastrophic event and post-disaster, next slide, you then test the plan. So what's really important is upon completion and then on an annual basis, you need to validate the plan, make sure it's viable. You can engage tabletops. So these are exercises where you engage your team or your DCC to walk through each interval of pre-event, event, and post-event activity. You make sure that it works. And if you test it and it doesn't, then you need to put lessons learned in place to address that. And then we move to maintenance. So you have the plan, you have your incident command structure, you have your roles, responsibilities, you have your action steps laid bare. Then you need to really make sure that after you test the plan, you're maintaining that plan, because it's only so good as it's live, it's fluid, it's changing to adapt to certain situations and certain circumstances. So you may run a plan update according to some seasonal activity that typically takes place. So May to October, we have hurricane season. You may trigger a plan review and update in April, May, early on, so that you're running through it with your entire BCC, your emergency response team, so that you can make any adjustments that you need. Or you may do this, at the end of summer, early fall, before you anticipate a really hard winter, if those predictions were to actually play out, how you're going to address ice storms and power outages or extended periods of perhaps a blizzard, which seems like the least of our concerns right now, right? So with that, you also have to make sure that your communication is in place in such a way that you're conveying the plan to your emergency response team. They are very confident in knowing what their activities and action steps are, and that they have it properly stored. They communicate it with their staff. They know that they have it electronically filed, and they also have a manual file. As Linda said earlier, she slept with that big binder under her pillow. I think it's so crucial that when you are impacted by disaster, whether it be an act of terrorism, a natural disaster, or a disaster that we're experiencing all, unfortunately, right now, that you have to prepare for anything else that can take place while you're responding to a disaster. There are forces that are going to prey on the vulnerabilities that might create co-disasters at the same time. So it's important that you consider that. There are these events that can trigger the scams and cybersecurity attacks and what have you, that would double up, if not triple up, the weaknesses that you're experiencing all at once. So it's important that you have a plan to mitigate those co-occurring disasters that may take place. Next slide. So strategy is essential. It's the most important to execute when it comes to putting your plan in place according to these principles. So making sure that your plan is well coordinated, it's unified, it's organized, and that you approach it in a unified manner. Make sure your communication strategy allows and enforces persistent connections amongst all of your staff, your residents, and your stakeholders, your board members. It's a culture of inquiry and information exchange across the board, and then information sharing. So share vital information across all these departments, again, with your residents, your board, your stakeholders. It's really crucial to keep everyone up to date. Being in the dark is really scary. So as I mentioned early on, when you have a communication strategy, an incident command structure that incorporates the key staff and informs them how to carry out their roles and responsibilities, and you test it and retest it and maintain it, they have a degree of confidence to carry it out. And one of the scariest things that you can imagine as we're all experiencing is feeling out of control. And it's really important to have a degree of control in what you can mitigate in terms of risks and how you respond as opposed to react. Next slide. So here's the resident engagement, communications, and emergency response, just a couple of examples before and after Superstorm Sandy. So with resident engagement, it was crucial to prepare in advance. So we created these go bags. So a go bag is considered like your essential duffel bag of items that you need to equip your residents with, and we put these together and distributed them, that also incorporated photo albums that had critical items, contact information, an insurance card, insurance policy copies, medications, med conditions. It's like your fact sheet for yourself, your physician information, and your emergency contacts, to make sure that all of that was embedded in one location. And then also, providing an effective means to keep residents aware and have access to resources. So we had disaster kits created and emergency supplies, non-perishables on site, a good water supply. So sourcing those essential items in advance is crucial. The other thing that's not on this slide for resident engagement, but I wanted to mention with Superstorm Sandy is make sure you have your hotel accommodations set up in advance, and do yourself a favor. We, ran into the risk of having to find a location in 2 different counties, operating in 3 counties, that unfortunately one of the hotel accommodations did not have a generator and was located in an area that had septic water. So if anybody is familiar with that, you need to pour water into the toilet to flush the toilet. So it was quite a challenge with our consumers who were really, low functioning, that were relocated when it came to a mandatory evacuation, to have that stressor. And here we took a whole floor of a hotel. And I have to say that they did awesome under the circumstances, but that was an added stressor. So having other residents located in a hotel that had a generator and these accommodations made a huge difference. So plan for that in advance, even under these circumstances. If you did have to set up quarantine accommodations, that's something to consider. Again, as I mentioned, code disasters that occur at the same time. We've had some power outages with the storms that we had a week ago and the week prior. So put that in perspective when it comes to special needs and vulnerable populations. And then the communication strategies that we put in place. We used a GroupMe text chain that we put in place ahead of time. And then we tested it out. We actually took all of our IT down, our servers down. We had a backup system, and we put everything into the cloud. At that time, we had to ramp that up. It was like newer technology to us, but we did it anyway. And then we started to send out automatic emergency notifications and testing to make sure the communications were functioning. With these apps, we had the Nixle installed. We had walkie-talkies for particular sites, so that if communication went down, we were able to communicate and assess damage. We had the crank chargers. We used social media actually to convey the status of the safety and security and the needs of our consumers and staff. We made sure our vendor lists were intact. Again, I had to reach out to the structural engineer and vendors to respond on site day after. So that was effective as far as having access to all that information. And then we had a remote contact in another state and country for communications. We had, very, very poor access to newsfeed as to what was going on. And as you can imagine, FEMA had identified all of these drop spots for supplies for, different locations that were really hard hit. So you had the Jersey Shore, you had Red Hook, you had, specific areas within New York City and the outskirts and Long Island's that were hard hit, and Manhattan. And what was happening is that FEMA had these drop spots, but because we had no power, other than if we're sitting in our cars and listening to the radio, and try as you can to access this emergency information, we were able to get that information from our contacts in other states, notably California, ironically, who was, calling it in to us through our GroupMe text chain to communicate where those FEMA drop-off spots were, so we can mobilize our team and get out there. So the next slide. Back. So the next slide, back. No, back one slide. All right, so here's our COVID response. So our communications and emergency response for COVID. What we put in place early March, we mobilized quickly and we did phone outreach to all our consumers regarding stay-at-home orders that we were hearing of from other locations overseas. That this started to ripple out, and we, started to convey some of the information to our consumers ahead of time as far as stocking up on food, medication, water, updating our contact and emergency information, and then requesting a no visitor policy. And then we started gathering all of this emergency information, and then we started to put together our mailings. So we had hand-delivered mail letters on the precautions, the stay-at-home orders, CDC information. We did it on the onset, and now we send those letters out every 10 days. We either drop them off if we're going out to a location, and then we also mail them out as well, so we could keep residents informed as to what's going on. And then we also have identified all our medically and psychiatrically frail consumers in advance so that we could plan for additional outreach or additional planning to wrap around that support with, the integrated primary behavioral health supports that the individuals have, or any backup that we may need. We canceled all our community events. Again, we put our go bags in place for essential supplies, even ordering thermometers and over-the-counter, like Tylenol, having toothbrush and toothpaste, and just these kits that, in the event that they needed to access essential supplies, they had them at the ready. And then we started to set up meal deliveries. Linda mentioned earlier, food goes a long way. It's important in our organization, and we continue to have the food deliveries at the group homes. We delivered food to our multifamily sites, and we also have connections with some of our the municipalities in which we work and live that have outreach. So, for instance, Edison has been doing mobile meal delivery, which has been awesome for our consumers that are living out in the community. So moving into the business functions. So again, early March, we assembled our emergency response team. We have calls every Monday and Friday. HR early on sent out a notification that we're triggering our emergency response. Our protocols for all staff were put in place. We detailed our staggered schedules. We thinned out our staff in the offices, and we instituted a time and a half pay for our 24/7 residential sites. We installed right at the beginning WhatsApp for our emergency response team on all our devices, and we set up notifications with our emergency response team. So we tested everything out. I started to build out our incident command structure as this was taking place. We reached out for PPE and supplies through different supply chains. We started to go shopping out of state when we started to see that we were having difficulty within certain areas in New Jersey. We went out of our comfort zone and were able to access PPE as well. Again, we didn't stay local, and we went, across other counties to access some supplies. Just as a side funny note, one of our staff said, before all this happened, I thought PPE meant pay period ending. I had no idea what this was going to mean now. Funny, but not so funny, right? So we, just moving along, we increased petty cash. We increased our credit card protocols so that the key staff that were identified in our emergency response, they had the ability and felt comfortable and had their limits to just purchase the supplies as they came across them. And we didn't stockpile. We just made sure that we had enough for our residents, especially in the group homes, and that we had our go bags, our duffel bags, and we're able to put supplies in place for that. If you're not aware, there's this product called Otaban. It's a antiviral agent. It comes in big tubs at Home Depot. You have to mix it yourself, but this is something that, again, thinking outside of the box, we put that in place. PPE, who would have thought your bed bug supply of your coverings, your coveralls, your booties would now serve as PPE. These are all just, just thinking outside of the box in terms of supply chain. Also, just for business continuity schedules, again, we put all these different schedules in place to handle business continuity that's already embedded in our business continuity plan. But this is like a hyper extended emergency response period as we all are experiencing. And so that requires us to change our protocols weekly. So as we're changing them, we're making notations in our business continuity plan with respect to how we're going to operate in a very different way based on this. So we're making these notations. It's live. It's messy right now, but we're putting it all in place. And we have a good chain of communication and identifying how we're tracking all of this. And then last but certainly not least, so we mobilized our cleaning services quickly on, put in sanitization protocols for all residential and multifamily sites. We have it twice a week, and we have logs for completion throughout the shifts. Everybody has to wipe everything down and sanitize all the locations. They log it. We maintain those logs on site in our offices and all of our locations. So that's what COVID response looks like with respect to some of the activities we put in place prior to and currently operating with those same protocols. And then to recap, I ask you to move to the next slide, Linda. So here's business continuity plan snapshot. So resident safety and security is our chief most concern, as well as our staff safety and security. So again, when you're looking at building your continuity plan, make sure you're updating all your contact information, making sure that you know the phone service, the device of your consumers, so that you know whether or not you could do telephonic outreach. You need to look at your emergency supply and your supply chain, your communication strategy to notify your residents/tenants, looking at your service delivery schedules and how you modify the program. And then moving to business operations, you're covering HR, making sure your staff communications are conveyed to all of your staff, making sure that your employee assistant program information is conveyed to the staff, because these are tough times and self-care is really important, especially in hyper extended crises such as the pandemic. And then looking at your payroll and disaster pay adjustments, it's really important. Linda mentioned earlier, thank you cards and gift cards and these tangible items are really important to convey thanks. And what we also instituted is phone calls that we're putting out on different shifts just to check in. I'm checking in and other staff are checking in just with one another and calling those shifts just to reach out and say, hey, how you doing? And then looking at your fiscal department, your cash flow, billing, rent, all of those items, and then how you're managing the credit cards when you increase petty cash and your reconciliations, looking at your facilities, your backup systems, security, property management, notifying your tenants of what's going on, looking at your moratoriums and your waivers, your waiver late fees, and then looking at IT. Make sure you do your asset inventory for IT, making sure you have storage, backup, and having an individual, your IT team leader, responsible to stay on top of it, and then perform your risk assessments and make sure that you're looking at the threats. Like I said, cybersecurity is well and alive right now. We got a lot of hacks going on, phishing scams. So be clear to convey that to staff, because just as an aside, that there are a lot of clever ways that people can hack in. And, unless you're conveying to your staff how to be really IT careful to mitigate risk, it's really crucial at a time like now. And doing the same with consumers, with phone calls, with, the census going on and people walking door to door and pretending to be census staff. It's unfortunate, but that information has to be conveyed to consumers and staff members. And then last is your building protection and site access. Make sure you have snapshots and that you have them electronically and manually, so that if your systems went down, if your fire alarm system started to go off, you know how to disarm it. And if you don't, that your landlord disclosure in the municipalities in which you operate will have the police and the fire officials know that you have a lockbox outside your facility so that they can gain access and be able to disarm those systems for you. So that's a snapshot of business continuity. And so with all of that, is your head exploding yet? Next slide. It's a lot of information. It really is. Breathe. You've got this. Each one of you is a leader and you're talented and respected. So we just have to stay calm and look at now what. So next slide. So you're in the middle of a crisis. If your business continuity plan is outdated, if you don't have one, if you haven't mobilized emergency response or you've done it in a quasi way as far as just putting this all together as you go, no problem. So what do you do first? Let's look at the next slide. So cash is king, right? We need to look at, how you monitor your cash balances. So you have to look at creating a forecasting spreadsheet, right? And if you bill fee for service, revise your billing estimates so that you can reflect the current revenue projections. And you can look at some of the contraction and constriction that's going to take place when it comes to service delivery, right? So your 24/7 sites might ramp up, and you have a lot more activity, and if you're paying time and a half or double time, you're looking at those cost projections. And then if you're in a fee for service environment, now you have to really look at how do you mitigate some of the variances with respect to that, and also consider if you're looking at a service such as outpatient, partial care, supportive housing, your units are going to be severely impacted. So are there things that you could do to change it up? Can you look at, managing your working capital so that you ask vendors for discounts, stretch your payments, look at your frequency of service billing, maybe, looking at your billing errors and rapidly resubmitting those errors, look for donor pledges, or ask donors if they can remove restrictions, and consider all of your financial resources. Talk to a CPA or a tax advisor. Look at the CARES Act. I know that that fund balance, the first tranche, and now the second has just disappeared. But look at how you can access unrelated business income. Look at payroll tax incentives, changes that can affect donors. All of these things you need to take advantage of if you could, and ask your board members or other stakeholders to reach out to their constituencies, see what they can provide, if at all anything, and even reach out to your banks, see if they have a nonprofit checking that you can earn a higher rate now that everything has hit the floor. There are a couple of banks out there that 0.25% is better than zero. So think about, some of these out of the box ways in which you can try to stay afloat as best as you can, while, as they say, it's like building your plane as you're flying into the middle of a hurricane. That's how it feels, right? And it doesn't mean that you can't build it well and you can't survive and get on the other side of this, but putting that all into perspective, and then not necessarily, sleeping on it in the way that Linda mentioned. Don't go to bed with all this baggage, but definitely refresh in the morning and think about your protocols and different ways that you can change things up, and give your emergency response team or your business continuity committee, give them the role and responsibility to help step it up with you, and to manage this the best way that you can. So next slide. Don't worry, I'm not going to sing. I'm a terrible singer. So let's start at the beginning. So if you have no business continuity plan, let's just wrap it up there. Slide, next slide. Keep it simple. If you don't have a plan or one that's terribly outdated, start at the beginning. Gather your emergency response team, develop an incident command structure, assign roles and responsibilities, put the plan into place, test it, identify your current needs, prioritize them, whether it's IT, staffing, or toilet paper. Start to develop your plan. It's living document. As I said, I am changing and drafting and notating everything that we are doing as we build the plane flying into a hurricane. So I think it's just important that you look at, we're going to get through this pandemic and we're going to sharpen our expertise while we're planning and recovering. And lastly, delegate. The goal is for everyone to be confident. There is enough effective leadership in place. You've got this. The staff can affirm their roles and convey their confidence and let them take ownership to a new level while you're going through this, but also remember, identify, periods of burnout where you know that you could have redundancies where somebody else may need to step in and provide some additional support. And, last but least, it's important that we all rely on each other. This is not a time where anything that we do or we say cannot be shared with one another. We need to band together collectively and constructively and to share our thoughts and expertise and ideas and supply chains and whatever is out there so that we can not only survive in the best way that we can, but we can thrive on the other side of this. So with that, be well, be safe. I wish you all the very best. Please reach out if there's anything that we can do. And I now turn it back to you, Linda.
Leslie, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for all of that really, really important review of your planning and your, challenges and the successes and what you've done over the years. So thanks very, very much. And I think the way forward, we're just going to wrap up before questions with this slide. Keep calm and have a business continuity plan. And we're going to go, I'm going to do one commercial break, and then we're going to go to questions and answers. We're going to get the tally for the poll that Leslie asked before. But here's the little commercial break right now, just for those folks who are in residential housing or a developer. We, SRS Strategic Associates, we are engaged with a terrific project with Edison Township, which is funding for housing units for people with special needs. So the key here is to look down and take that phone number down. I'm going to say it out loud. There's a phone number and then there's an email, 609-642-2282. And if you prefer to email, you can email special housing, one word, at srsstrategic.com. And what we are working with the township is to provide funding up to $25,000 per unit or bedroom. There's money for generators and emergency repairs, very apropos from today's webcast. And SRS is providing free assistance with the application by providing a toolkit and actually holding your proverbial hand and going through the application with you for this money. So we just wanted to take the opportunity for folks that would be interested in that. So definitely give us a call or email our special housing address. Okay, on to questions and answers, and we're going to turn it over to Shelley, who's going to first give us the polling results.
Hi, everybody. Thanks again for joining us today. 90% of the respondents to the poll, the answer was yes. So, Leslie, I'm sure you're computing what that means in terms of your presentation. We have some questions that I did publish and some that came in other ways. and we have all of about 14 minutes, so I'm just going to ask that you guys respond, kind of briefly. All right, this one's for Linda. How do you get your staff engaged in preparing a plan when they're not currently experiencing an emergency?
Great question. And what is important is to do, and I'm not a clinical person, but it's more behavioral and more pop psychology, if you will, in terms of getting people to stop and pause and put their day-to-day responsibilities aside. You'll get so many excuses or so many reasons, and I mean good excuses, day-to-day operations will always people will think take precedent, but in the end, what you reinforce with your staff is we have to plan. And if you give concrete examples about past experiences, about things that went right and things that went wrong, you can usually be able to point the problems that were due to a lack of planning or preparedness. And so what you want to stress, I'll just summarize, is that you want to stress that being prepared and taking the time out of the day-to-day operations and the demands that everyone faces, dealing with folks in whatever program or service offerings they're involved in, is to demonstrate to them the value of being able to be prepared and how it's going to help them be more effective and efficient in the time of crises. And you just have to literally say, turn off the phones. If somebody really needs you, they'll call the front desk, or you figure out a way for emergency planning, emergency contacts, and get people to focus and pay attention. And whatever you do, please do not postpone your reviews or your tabletop exercises. As I relayed before, had I not done that the month before, I was late in doing it, and thank goodness I had it in place, and we would have really been caught unawares had that plan not been updated the month before. So you have to have regular quarterly meetings or biannual, depending on your culture and your schedule for training. Thanks, Shel.
Okay, this one's for Leslie. Who's the person within your organization who's responsible to assure your plan is up to date and tested?
Myself, our COO, and our emergency response team comes together to review it. And our administrative assistant is the one that actually updates the actual plan. So it takes a village, all of us coming together. We do the periodic reviews. It's a really large binder, so it's no small feat, but it does take the team with the leadership, again, myself, the COO, the administrative assistant, all updating that plan, but then conveying it to the emergency response team, because there are portions of the plan that have particular job descriptions, job functions, worksheets that are included in our plan for each position that was on that table of organization, as you saw. So each of those individuals, with regard to their roles and responsibilities, take part in updating that plan. Thank you.
Shelley, I'd like to jump in here. It was Leslie who reminded me yesterday when we were speaking that you cannot rely on thinking you will have access to your plan on your electronic devices. So when she was mentioning binders, that's why we keep talking about binders, is that you need to have that hard copy because you may not have access at any given time throughout an emergency on your electronic devices.
Thanks, Linda. The next question's for, well, either of you, but I'm going to field it to Leslie. Where can you get outside help to develop your plan?
So I think you have help right here before you with SRS and CCC Housing to support you in what we can with your plan. There are, of course, resources that are online, but in particular, when it comes to building out some of the ground level activity that needs to take place, you really can, look towards, again, us as resources, or look online, but it might not give you that level of particular support. I also encourage you to go to the Enterprise Foundation website. They do have toolkits as well, and Sea Change, as Linda pointed out. Those are really valuable resources that you can access. But I do have to say, in our experience with the Enterprise Foundation, walking through this, we already had our plans in place, but they helped us to assess things in a very different way when it came to our building vulnerabilities, our resident vulnerabilities, and some of the staffing challenges. Under these circumstances, we had a conversation with the New York and New Jersey leadership a month ago, and we brought the collaborative back together, and to hear that some staff right in the heart of New York City would not even show up on shift because they were terrified. So thinking about some of those vulnerabilities under these circumstances, it's important to connect with people who have been there, who know it, and can walk you through it. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie. I do think that another piece to the answer on this is what you both spoke about going out to, maybe you have board members or folks who are attorneys or CPAs or first responders, to work on your specific plans. You did both mention that. Two more questions. First one, Leslie, what's the biggest lesson learned from your experience going through Superstorm Sandy and now COVID-19?
That is a loaded question. So the biggest lesson learned for me with Superstorm Sandy in my capacity at that time was how to handle your most vulnerable consumers and to assist them and support them in maintaining their equilibrium when they're dealing with such a long sustained displacement post Superstorm Sandy. That was one of our biggest challenges, to make sure that they remained safe and calm, that they had what they needed off-site to be displaced from their homes with the folks that we serve in Ocean and Monmouth County was heartbreaking. And we had to respond swiftly, and we had to provide a sustained amount of resilience to help them recover. And we were really grateful through the block grant, the Superstorm Sandy block grant that came about, that we were awarded 75 vouchers post Sandy, that we were able to place people into housing, 75 families and individuals within 2.5 months. So that was a godsend. And I also have to shout out to, again, Enterprise Foundation and the Robin Hood Foundation for supporting our efforts to support our consumers, our staff, and our organization.
Leslie, do you want to say anything more about lessons learned so far with COVID-19?
Oh, yeah. Thank you for that reminder. Thank you. So I think what's really important is that you look at, the communications that you have, again, across the state, looking at New York as an epicenter, and New Jersey. When you look at how folks are mobilizing in advance of a pandemic and sharing information, I think that that's really important, and how folks are mobilizing their emergency response, and to do a lot of outreach with other CEOs and executive directors. For us, I have to say personally, looking at the impact overseas, it gave me an advantage of seeing the lockdowns that were taking place in late February. And once that started, it became real. And that's, again, one of the biggest lessons learned with this is to act quickly. That magical thinking that Linda mentioned, there's no time for that. Act quickly, communicate as much as you can with your team, reassure your staff, validate the fear, but also mobilize the effort and let them know they can be in control of this if you provide them and equip them with the tools that they need to get through it.
Thank you. One last question, and that is, there was a lot of material discussed in this presentation. How can I get more details related to the slides? I'll leave that open to either of you that want to respond.
Hi, it's Linda. I would say that if you're interested, please send us an email. You have the email that you can use was the one that you registered on, and I'm hoping I'm correct in that. I'm going to ask our other producer on the line to validate that through a text to me. But yes, we know that some of this stuff is very, very valuable, so we wanted to be able to be judicious in how we were able to share this. Again, we did want to use this as a blueprint for your organization, but we know some of this material is very helpful. The things that certainly you couldn't look up that we gave you the internet address for. So please drop us a note. For us, you could contact www.srsstrategic.com. And then for Triple C Housing, they're looking. Oh,
you have their website and you have Leslie's email.
Yeah, so you can write.
Got my email, so.
Yeah, you could use Shelley's email on the top there. Pardon me, thanks, Shelley. Or you could use Leslie's right there at the top.
Right.
And write that. Leslie, do you want to answer that?
No, I think that covers it. You have our website, and you could also reach us at info@triplechhousing.org, or my email you have there. I could direct you to the appropriate person if you are interested in the information or additional support.
Okay, so that we're winding up now. Thanks to everyone for participating. Hope you'll join us again in May, where we talk about moving forward with developing new programs and services, the light at the end of the tunnel, and we appreciate your time today. Thank you, everybody.